You know, I know heard some of that, but I wanted to play a bit more for you about what Hillary Clinton said about an issue you've talked a lot about. That, of course, is Benghazi.
There have been, as you know, a number of investigations, including the independent one that the State Department commissioned, as well as many in Congress. There are answers, not all of them, not enough, frankly. I'm still looking for answers because it was a confusing and difficult time.
It sounds like you and the Secretary agree that you are both still looking for answers.
Well, I was certainly encouraged when she said that, and I hope that that means Secretary Clinton will support the resolution that I filed in the U.S. Senate, along with 24 other senators, to have a joint select committee to investigate what happened in Benghazi. The House has created a select committee. I've asked the Senate to do so. And indeed, just a few weeks ago, when I stood on the Senate floor and asked for unanimous consent for the Senate to do our job to answer the questions that Secretary Clinton rightly noted are still there, Bob Menendez, the senator who's the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, stood up and objected. And you know, Aaron, his response was striking. In the course of objecting, he said, "I have no idea whether President Obama was awake or asleep the night that our Americans were under attack." And he went even further. He said, "I have no idea whether there was anything President Obama could have done to save the lives of those 4 Americans. But we don't need to answer those questions." Well, with respect, I think those questions are important to all the men and women serving in our nation, and we ought to get to the bottom of the truth.
Now, look, it is true, of course, on Benghazi that there need to be answers. People need to be held accountable, regardless of the politics around it. But the politics have taken center stage. You've been a big part of that. And as you know, Hillary Clinton recently in an ABC interview said Republican criticism, a lot of it coming from you. She didn't say that, but I'm noting for our viewers, you've been very critical of her handling of Benghazi has actually incentivized her to run for president. I mean, do you think you're emboldening her by continuing with these investigations?
You know, Aaron, the truth isn't partisan. They're basic questions that haven't been answered, and she views it as criticism. To ask what happened that night, why were we attacked by terrorists, why didn't we prevent it, why didn't we have assets in place to save those 4 Americans? And why did the administration tell the American people its story that was demonstrably false? Now, what we do know is even though Secretary Clinton today is telling CNN there are a lot of answers that need to be answered, we know that in the aftermath of Benghazi, her chief political aide, Cheryl Mills, told career Foreign Service officers, don't talk to reporters, don't talk to Congress, don't talk about what happened. And it is not partisan to simply say we should get to the truth. That should be a bipartisan objective, but unfortunately, Secretary Clinton from the beginning has stonewalled on this rather than acting as a partner getting to the bottom of what happened.
Well, I mean, you know, it's interesting. I know they were saying, look, part of the reason they didn't want to talk to reporters was they wanted understood more about what happened because they didn't want it to become politicized. They wanted to come out with an accurate part of the story. Maybe that was a poor way from public relations of handling it, but it may have made sense. I mean, if she says now, look, I still need answers, isn't that enough for you?
We don't have the answers, though. I mean, she says
but, I mean, she's admitting I don't have them all. I'm not trying to say I'm blameless. I'm trying to get answers.
But she's not trying to get answers. She's trying to block the answers from ever being answered. Indeed, her most famous comment on this is, what difference does it make? She views this as purely through the lens of partisan politics. And we owe the men and women serving this nation, we owe our diplomatic corps, we owe our ambassadors. Ambassador Christopher Stevens was the first U.S. ambassador killed in the line of duty since 1979. We owe it to the men and women serving this country to get to the bottom, not to play politics with it.
How has she played politics with it, though? Her specifically,
by having her political aide instruct career Foreign Service officers, do not talk about what happened, do not answer questions from Congress or the media. And indeed, the White House, Aaron, lied to the media. You'll recall the White House told the media, we did not change the talking points at all about what happened in Benghazi.
Well, there's still questions as to where those talking points got altered. As you and I both know, that's a complicated trail.
Aaron, with respect, there are no questions. There are 11 edits that they've admitted now they did change. So there's no dispute that they changed it, and there's no dispute that they lied on it.
Whether it was about tone or honesty. But I want to get at this point, though.
But no, it wasn't tone or honesty. What they did specifically, and there's a broader point, the edits they made is they edited out every reference to Al-Qaeda, and radical Islamic terrorism. And the problem with the Obama-Clinton foreign policy, you know, throughout this town hall, Secretary Clinton said everything was a hard choice. This was a hard choice. That was a hard choice. There's a reason everything appears to be a hard choice because
yes, but let me just make this point. I know neither you or I want to have a whole interview about Benghazi, but Al-Qaeda itself is a complicated term, right? Maybe they took the words out because that would imply direction straight from Al-Qaeda headquarters on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, right? As opposed to a group who was inspired by. There were reasons to take those terms out that made complete sense.
Aaron, with respect, no, they didn't, because they didn't just take out Al-Qaeda. They took out any reference to radical Islamic terrorism. And the most consistent error of the Obama-Clinton foreign policy is a failure to understand the nature of the people we're dealing with, of our enemies. It is striking that neither President Obama nor Hillary Clinton in this discussion tonight are willing to utter the words radical Islamic terrorism. They do not understand the radical religious extremism of individuals committed to jihad who have pledged to murder Americans. And that leads them to keep making the mistakes over and over and over again, whether it is releasing 5 senior Taliban terrorists without understanding that these individuals will likely return to active warfare against the United States, whether it is, in the case of Iraq, not understanding the threat posed by ISIS. I'll tell you a great question we ought to be asking right now is whether the Obama administration has armed ISIS, these radical Islamic terrorists, whether they have armed them in Syria, because we know they're arming some of the rebels, and we haven't had an answer as to which rebels they're arming and which they're not. And you cannot win a battle against radical Islamic terrorism if you're unwilling to utter the words radical Islamic terrorism, if you don't acknowledge the character.